Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer, and this is Strange Mosaic. One of our favorite guests is here with me in this final show I'm recording before Thanksgiving. Sofia Smallstorm is back. And Sofia, I have to tell you how much thick of skin it takes on my part to do these shows with you. And I only do them because I absolutely adore you and I think your mind is fascinating. But every time I do a show with you, I get the Sofia fan crew that comes in and is like, Emily, shut up. We just want to hear Sofia.
No, you can't, especially because today I vented in our pre-chat and they would hear me venting and that would be very inappropriate because they don't know what I'm really like.
So we did a show a few months back and we had kind of left it at, okay, the next time we do a show we are going to talk about sharks, because you revealed to me that you loved Shark Week, and that both it equally surprised me and didn't surprise me. And then when you told me you have, a full website dedicated to sharks, I was like, okay, I'm going to go take a look at that, and we'll talk about that next time. And we're going to in the second hour. But in the first hour, the public hour here, I want to rewind a little bit, because what I love about your newsletters is they're timeless. They're very rarely, something that is like only momentarily or current event type of important. They're timeless. And I want to rewind to your February 2022 newsletter and first tell you that it might be one of my favorites you've ever done. It reveals a side of you that I know to exist because I know you, and that people who have been following your work and reading your newsletters for a long time see always sort of pop out as part of the way you do things. But I feel like this newsletter is like you at your most sort of like playful and I don't know. I love it. And I picked it, truthfully. I'm going to tell you why I picked it, right? Like, I had been supposed to catch up on the last 6 months of your newsletters on my flights to Los Angeles and back. And I ended up being exhausted and falling asleep on both flights. So I just took a scan and was like, I'm going to pick this one because I like the words in the pre-description. And then I read it and I was like, oh, I love this, actually. Like, I really love it. So my inner knower picked a good one. So I'm happy to have you here to talk about the February 2022 newsletter, and then we'll get into sharks next time. So welcome back, and how are you?
I'm okay. And Emily, I think I will provide your listeners with a PDF. You can upload it somewhere of that newsletter so they can see me at my best, as you claim this is.
Well, you're most playful. I wouldn't necessarily say it's I think you have lots of bests. You do lots of things well, right? But this one is like, this one surprised me a little bit. It was so playful and light and ethereal and colorful and magical. And it's delightful. So I think people will definitely enjoy it. And I'm excited to talk about it with you here. So,
All right. Well, that's nice of you. You know, I think it was an unusual newsletter as well, but because of the latter half of it, and I always begin in a strange place and then rewind, it's like a little bit going through a maze. And so anyway, the maze takes us to a different kind of subject. But anyway, let's start. Let's not annoy people by talking in circles around the newsletter. All right?
let's jump in and
Jump.
let's start with I was not aware that we share a mutual attraction to color samples.
Yeah, the PMS guide. Do you have one of those, or what do you have?
I
Why?
don't I don't have a PMS guide, but since I've been a child, I've always been very attracted to like the paint samples at the hardware store and to large boxes of colored pencils that have, hundreds of colors of every shade of every color and to look at. And as an adult, I'm a huge fan of the psychedelic experience, mostly for the vivid colors that it brings forth. And those colors have always made me have certain feelings and certain thoughts and certain emotions and moods. And I've always been well aware of that. And one of the first experiences was with sort of paint sample type of things. So, but I don't have a PMS sample guide, but now maybe I should get one.
No, just walk into Home Depot and take a few swatches in there and then make your own. Because seriously, like Behr paints, can't tell you how many shades of everything they have. But yeah, it's interesting that you say that color puts you in different moods, and this is why they use light therapy, color therapy, which I have never really experienced, but I can certainly believe it. Human beings see, a million shades or so. While there are really multiple millions of colors out there, shades and whatnot. So I did take a color theory course in college, and there are four categories to color. There's temperature and shade, which are sub-qualifiers in a sense, but then there's hue and hue. My God, there's another one, tint. Tint is how much white is added. Shade is how much black is added. Oh, value. Value is the other one. Yeah, hue, value, temperature, and shade. And once you know about this, for instance, value is a very interesting property to color. If you were to turn an image into black and white, certain colors would look like the same shade of gray because they share a similar value.
Okay.
So anyway, that's getting a little technical, but yes, human eyes can register color due to an area called the extrastriate cortex. We need light to see color. In the dark, you're not seeing color at all. In the dark, your rods work, and in the daylight, your cones work. So we have different types of light receptor cells in our eyes called rods and cones. I'm sure most people are familiar with those. And we have three kinds of cones. So those are the color sensitive cells. And each color stimulates more than one cone. So the rods are around the edge of the retina, and they see only black, white, and gray, and they take over from the cones in dim light. So you need light to see color. So you've got 6 million cones in the center of each retina. And they collaborate. They're like musicians in an orchestra. They collaborate to make a single unique signal for each color. And I call that like a song, all right? And they distinguish 1 million colors that way. And then that's relayed to your brain, which interprets those colors. So now your turn, Emily.
So everybody hear that? Sophia says it's my turn. Okay. So it's interesting what you're saying about like the colors relating to sort of sound or song, right? Or that these cones sort of act like an orchestra. One of my listeners sent me a TikTok video this week with a little girl who has synesthesia, and for her, certain colors make certain sounds, right? And there's certain, and so she was explaining this. The little girl was like 4 or 5. She was explaining it, how it works, and that what the sounds sound like that the colors make. And her mother was explaining how there's certain clothes that she cannot wear because her daughter will not look at her if she wears them, right? Because she doesn't like the sound that it makes, right? And so when you're talking about this, it's kind of interesting. I've experienced forms of synesthesia, never something so particular as like, oh, this color creates this sound in my head and I can't stand it, or I love it, or whatever. But I'm familiar with the experience of that sort of crossover. But yeah, I like that you sort of correlate it to sound, and I very much do as well, if for no other reason than I've always been fascinated with the monitoring technology on sound systems, right? When I would go to parties and, I like techno music, and they have all of this equipment up there on the stage that the DJs and the artists use. And I always liked to watch the little digital LED light monitors on them that turn certain colors when certain sounds are achieved, or certain tones or frequencies or whatnot, right? So I've always been captivated by the relationship between sound and color, sound and light, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And people who report seeing UFOs say that they're surrounded by colors. They have lights on them that blink in colors that don't even exist here.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Have you,
So,
have you ever, just out of curiosity, you can feel free to answer or not, have you ever done any psychedelics?
Emily, I'll answer. Nope. I'm too square.
You're too square. Okay. So one of the most captivating and attractive parts of the psychedelic experience to me is the colors. And there are some colors that I have seen in the psychedelic space that despite having looked, high and low, cannot find something in reality that replicates it. I've gotten some things that are close. Some colors have been replicated, but others not. And these colors, for me at least, appear with my eyes closed. So on some level, they're coming from inside of me or from the same sort of process, but there's something about whatever the mushrooms, or for me, the most colorful psychedelic is mushrooms. I don't recall being that captivated by the colors and like the LSD experience or other experiences. Something in there is stimulating some version of some of these colors that is so not just beautiful, but full of information that is different than the colors here in the exterior world carry. Like it's different, it's like a more complete story or narrative, right?
It has a different dimension. Stop talking, Emily, and just let Sophia talk.
Absolutely. Carry on.
No, I'm joking. No. Yeah, so this is like a different segue into the rest of the newsletter, because you're talking about consciousness, that your brain has a different consciousness going when you see those colors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I interpreting this properly?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I decided to pull into this newsletter the material of Dr. Eben Alexander, the neurosurgeon. And he has left neurosurgery just to talk about what happened to him when he had a terrible experience that he had to be hospitalized for. And he went on a trip, like your psychedelic trips, Emily, but it was a heavenly trip.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. It was, I was surprised to hear that you had kind of an NDE,
Mm-hmm.
and that you were so captivated with looking into NDEs. I have another gentleman that I interview fairly regularly who actually lives in your area. I think you've met him before. He told me he's met you before. And he is an incredibly gifted lucid dreamer, but he also was recently interviewed on the NDE YouTube channel. And he's told me many times about his NDE, and there's a lot of similarities between the sort of initial stages of it that you described with how would you describe what you had? Would you describe it as like you started to have an NDE, or like a sort of partial NDE, right? Something like that.
Well, I didn't have the full experience. I'm in
Yeah.
a way sorry to say. I mean, I didn't see angels and all my dead relatives. I didn't get very far, but I did have the beginning of it, and then I had to recover from. I had a physical experience that was extremely, it was radical, and it
Mm-hmm.
affected the extrastriate cortex of my brain,
Mm-hmm.
which is the V4 area. And so I was left temporarily blind, and all of the color receptors in my eyes were damaged. I won't say that they were damaged in my eyes. That's incorrect. That area of my brain took a hit, but it did recover about 90 minutes later. But for a while, it was weird. I could only see like the sepia tone, and I couldn't see anything centrally.
Mm-hmm.
And I had discussed this with a number of doctors. I had what's known as a transient ischemic attack with
Uh-huh.
damage to the V4 area of the brain.
Okay.
And no doctor, even some of the best doctors whose names you know, nobody could interpret this for me. And it was just by pure accident that I stumbled into the extrastriate cortex when I was looking up color. And I went, wow, that's the area of my brain that got hurt in that event.
Mm-hmm.
And it recovered. But for a while there, I could only see, I had only peripheral vision, which is the rods. The rods give you peripheral vision. And it was all like weird, crappy sepia tone, no color. I would say it was brownish gray and white.
Mm-hmm.
And where I was supposed to have central vision, like in the center parts of my focal plane, I just had extremely bright, like supernovas going, blinding supernovas. So my eyes were receiving light, but the area of the brain that was supposed to interpret the light could
Mm-hmm.
not do it. The cones were not sending messages, or maybe they were, but that V4 area of the brain was messed up. And luckily it recovered because my peripheral vision got better. The supernovas in the center of the eye got smaller and smaller and smaller, and things started to fill in and they started to take on color. And then I was sure that I would be okay. But it was a little frightening. It really was. Really, really was. And I'll tell you something. While I had that I'll that event going on, I did leave, and I felt and saw the whole earth pulling away from me, and it was very dense and heavy and ugly, and all I saw people and everything pulling away, pulling away, pulling away into like this black hole. And that's important because it relates to what I learned from Ibn Alexander.
Yeah. My friend Daniel, who's I call him Birdie, he's Daniel Berdichevsky. He in his NDE, he described something similar to that, and then when he had a full NDE, and he got into a lot of the same territory that your Dr. Eben Alexander, who I'll let you go on and tell us a little bit about, that some of that same territory, right? And I'd say that the amount of crossover between his and Dr. Alexander's experience is fantastically high, right?
Wow,
And
yeah.
even some of the same, like the underlying or overall message is exactly the same thing that Daniel says.
Yeah, and
So,
that's stuff to really think about. Really think about, especially when you're here and you're going, oh me, oh my, you know,
yeah.
what are we going to do? Well, there are things to say. I'm very anxious to say them, but I don't want to like jump the gun and say them too early. So Ibn Alexander, this is November 2008. He was a neurosurgeon at the time, and he became ill. He woke up and he had a horrific backache, and he told his wife he didn't even want to go to work, which is very unusual for him. He got back in bed, and he got worse and worse. I mean, his wife could see before her eyes that he was in terrible pain, and he started to like, um, thrash around. And she said, "All right, look, we got to take you to the hospital." So she took him to the ER, and of course, he knew doctors at that hospital because he was a neurosurgeon who operated there. And he said that at the ER, they determined that he had a terrible infection going on. And they did a lumbar puncture on him and drew out his cerebrospinal fluid, which normally is clear. And he said that it was thick white pus and it was under pressure. And that means you are very, very, very ill. It turned out that he had a horrific bacterial infection. It's, what does he call it? Bacterial meningitis, a particular form of E. coli bacteria that was just like eating his brain up, eating it up, okay? And they tripled his antibiotic dose. they told his family, look, he's not going to make it. And if he does, his brain is going to be chewed up by this bacteria. He's not going to be much use to, neurosurgery or anything. He's going to be a vegetable. And so he was in this coma for a good week. And when he came out of it, he didn't have the ability to speak immediately. He had to regain that over the first couple of days, but he did work out over and over in his mind what the hell he had been through. And as soon as he could talk, he started talking about it. And he said that, he was in this incredible place. He was riding on a butterfly wing with a beautiful girl. There were souls dancing below in joy and mirth, and angels singing above. And here he is, this neurosurgeon, right? And the people around him, all these white coats, doctors, MDs, people that knew him personally, they thought he was tripping. They said, this is a trick of your brain. You haven't been anywhere. You're just babbling, just let's get through this and then you'll be normal and then we can really talk. Okay, Emily, any questions?
Nope. I'm with you. I kind of want to go through this with you first, and then I'm going to kind of let's just go through it. Let's let you go through it first, and then I'll tell you like sort of why this whole newsletter and experience sort of resonated so highly for me. But yeah, continue with Dr. Alexander.
All right, so Alexander wrote a book which became a bestseller, and it was called Proof of Heaven. And in this book, he described, it's a very interesting book because it's well constructed, easy to read, not too complex, and it does have some important medical information in it pertaining to his situation and his prognosis and all of that. But he said that there was this in his journey, which took place between maybe day 2 and day 5 of his coma. He said a spinning white light, perfect pure white light with fine white gold filaments, opened up and took him into this lovely gateway valley, a perfect ultra-real valley, lush with life. I was moving up through it. I was a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing with millions of other butterflies and lots of souls dancing below us, and beside me on the butterfly wing a beautiful girl. Deep in the middle of coma, her message to me was most assuring, and just to recall it now gives me shivers because of the beauty and the joy and the all-encompassing love that was part of it. And she never said a word, this beautiful girl on the butterfly wing with sparkling blue eyes, high cheekbones, high forehead, wide smile, but her thoughts came straight into my awareness, and these I share with all of you because they are important for all of us. This is the central message. You are deeply loved and cherished forever. There is nothing you can do wrong in that realm. Meaning not that anything you do in that realm is wrong, meaning nothing that you do here is considered wrong in that realm.
Yep.
So he says that this place where he was, this realm, was more real than all that we call real. And this beautiful girl next to him on the butterfly wing, she was conveying to him that all that really matters is this unconditional love, this infinite love of the Creator. So the next thing that I took from this book as I was reading it was this sound that he kept hearing. He said, in this realm, this splendid realm, there was all this gorgeous music, but above and beyond and through the music was this vibration. And he translated it as Aum, A-U-M, or O-M. He felt this angelic vibration, Aum. And as he continues his story, you get the sense that Aum is the ultimate. Aum is divinity. Aum is the source that we all want to connect with, and some of us are barricaded more than others. Some of us make no effort to connect with Om. But he says here in this book, the core, there is the gateway realm, and then all these butterflies and souls and whatnot singing and joyously dancing. It's filled to overflowing with the divine love of an infinite being of compassion and mercy. And that place is the core of the realm. And he says the deity at the core of all. For me, the word God was too puny a word. It was a little human word, and it had baggage, and therefore I refer to that infinitely loving being as Aum, A-U-M. That was the sound that I heard in that realm. And so
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I didn't know if you were pausing from, yeah, I want you to continue.
Well, you know, he says that that is what is real, this place where Om is, this core. And there is in Sanskrit a mantra, and they say it, you know, in yoga classes and whatnot, and Om Mani Padme Hum.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mantra or a chant that has been used throughout Buddhist cultures. Well, maybe they don't say it in yoga because that's Hindu, but it's Buddhist. The Buddhists say Om Mani Padme Hum. So in the Western world today, many who meditate will chant Om or Om. And this is a vibration. Let's just call it a vibration rather than a word that stands for God, or I call it the great Om. Actually, now if I get upset with somebody, I don't crunch nails in my head over it for too long. I just bless them and release them to have a conversation with the great Om.
I love it.
Okay, so now we're going to the environment that received all this, the hospital room, his family. So I wrote in my newsletter, I will say that for a hardcore neurosurgeon to be waxing on in blissful reverie about angelic choirs and souls dancing and how he sat on a butterfly wing with a beautiful blue-eyed girl is pretty much professional suicide.
You think?
Yeah. If you look up Eben, E-B-E-N, Alexander, and you watch some of his presentations, you'll see that his face is glowing. So he must be really happy with this professional suicide he just committed, right?
Yep.
And he, as soon as he came to consciousness and as soon as he had motor skills and writing ability, he wrote down volumes to get every detail he could remember from his adventure. And that was going on, let's remind ourselves, while his cerebral cortex was being consumed by a lethal and very rare form of E. coli bacteria. So he completely sidestepped the vegetative state that he would have been left in under normal circumstances, and he recovered everything, and he became this messenger of infinite love, right? Mm-hmm. So we're going to ask ourselves, all right, so what, whatever, but I'm going to take you to a place that he went to first, because I found this very, very interesting. So before he went into the gateway realm with all the angelic souls and the butterflies and the divine love, and the core came after that, the first place he ended up was in this claustrophobic, muddy underworld. And I'm going to read from his book. This was an underworld that echoed with a deep rhythmic pounding like the sound of metal against metal, as if a giant subterranean blacksmith was pounding an anvil somewhere, pounding it so hard that the sound vibrates through the earth or the mud or wherever it is that you are. I didn't have a body. I was simply there in this place of pulsing, pounding darkness. The longer I stayed in this place, the less comfortable I became, feeling like I wasn't really part of this subterranean world at all, but trapped in it. Grotesque animal faces bubbled out of the muck, groaned or screeched, and then were gone again, and I heard an occasional dull roar. Sometimes these roars changed to dim rhythmic chants, chants that were both terrifying and weirdly familiar, as if at some point I'd known and uttered them all myself. So he wanted out of there. And he said the more the faces that bubbled up out of that darkness became ugly and threatening, the rhythmic pounding off in the distance sharpened and intensified as well. This became the work beat for some army of troll-like underground laborers, performing some endless, brutally monotonous task. The movement around me was as if reptilian, worm-like creatures were crowding past, occasionally rubbing up against me with their smooth or spiky skins. Yuck! Then came, I'm not reading from his book anymore, this is my writing. Then came a dank, fetid smell of biological death, he says. Biological death. And he knew he absolutely had to get out of there. And that's when the darkness broke, and this white light descended, obliterating the pounding, spinning, 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 generating these filaments tinged with gold. All right, so Emily, this underworld, you know what I thought of? Or do you want to say something?
I want to hear what you thought of, and then I'll tell you. You tell me yours, and then I'll tell you mine.
Well, when I was going through the NDE, I just had a little teeny little, like one bite of an hors d'oeuvre, not even a full hors d'oeuvre. The earth pulled away. It became dark and dense and roaring and black. And I was thinking, boy, that world I've just been in is a really dense place. But this underworld is even denser. And I think this is the dimension of darkness that the perps, the powers that be, you know, creating the Hadron Collider.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, trying to get into this other realm. They're pulling energy from this like reptilian, pounding, thrashing, miserable darkness. They're pulling that energy into our world.
So, okay. So a couple of things. Didn't you do a series, like, weren't you for a while, several years back, on some idea you were calling biological darkness?
Yes.
Right. So that just, I just was reminded of that just now as well. Not when I read the letter, but just now. Right. I remember that. So I was thinking about that. But when he describes this sound, it made me think of a couple of things. It made me think of underground techno parties that I've been to, and I have some more to say about that, which I will in a second. But I also thought about particle accelerators under the ground, right? And these frequencies, these noises, this metal clanking on metal that is being made, and that, you know, has all of these other things that are sort of going along with it, right? You know, and then there's this idea that they're looking for the God particle, right? So, but I'm going to go back, like, you know, and I have a lot of thoughts and ideas about particle accelerators and what they really are and what they're actually doing, as opposed to what we've been led to believe they are, and who we've been led to believe put them there and what they're doing and whatnot. But for like the sake of this conversation, I agree with what you just said, right? And when I go to underground parties, like, so it's literally, they're called underground parties, right? And the style of music that I like is techno, like a very specific kind of techno. And when it was describing this anvil, machine smith, metalsmith kind of thing, I was like, yes, that is what a lot of the techno that I like a lot of people would refer to it. Right. So that exists. And if you go to an underground techno party and the DJ is bad, or the sound system is bad, or the room is not good for sound, it can be that and only that. Right. But one of the things that I love about techno, and as you were describing this in your newsletter, and the way he sort of describes it, is I love this, like you're working away, you're creating this clanking sound, the metalsmith is doing his thing, but over the course of time, if the DJ is good, if the sound system is good, if sometimes you need the overall vibe in the room to be good, other times you can achieve it by yourself. You're sort of developing this rhythm that starts out that way, but over time develops right into, whittles away the other stuff and builds into this sound that has this hum and this vibration that feels like it is raising you or delivering you to another higher realm that is full of light and gold and colors and all of this kind of stuff. I've had this experience numerous times in dark, dank warehouses in East Los Angeles of like this movement from what would be described by many as almost a pit of hell into this incredibly elevated space where the sound is as you described and the colors are as you described, and there's a lightness of being. Now, for me, it is happening inside of me. I don't know what is happening for the other people there, and sometimes I have been many times, many more times I've had the experience of not having that than I have of having it, where I've been to parties where the vibe is bad, the music is bad, the sound is bad, and I can't, I guess what it is like an experience of like an ascension sort of within, but that is, done in sort of like a collaboration with this sound or this resonance, right? And for me, a lot of times, if I can't kind of lock into something where I think I'm going to be able to have an experience like that, I'll just check out, I'll leave, or I'll just go outside and chat with people that I know, or whatever it is. But this sort of refining of the metal or the ore of sound into something greater is the experience that I'm going for, right? On the flip side, like we hear all about the dark realms being accessed or opened up, or all of this evil doing going on with particle accelerators. And that's certainly one way to perceive it. And I think that certainly a lot of the companies who, in sort of my understanding of things, have sort of taken possession on some level of these particle accelerators, but I don't believe they were actually the originators or the creators of them, have attempted to use them for such things. But I think what they actually are in their nature is just these creators of incredibly intense rhythms, vibrations, and frequencies that, have a myriad of possibilities. But certainly at this point, the people who seem to be controlling the access and the application of them maybe have something along the lines of what you described in mind. And so they're being used in that way. But the description he used, I mean, it was exactly, to me, it described the experience of ascension or deliverance through vibration and dancing and movement and sound and light and color, right? Into that same place that he experiences in his NDE. And I was like, wow, it's exactly it. Right.
Well, Emily, I would venture to say that your somewhat parallel experience is really qualitatively different in that unless we have been to where he went,
right,
through a death experience, I don't know that we can really compare what we get in the life experience, right? So
we don't know until we've been there.
Yeah, but to say similar but not equal is fair, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he definitely went into some kind of higher octave of existence.
Yes.
And he came back to become a messenger to others. Now, what I find interesting is that people who've had a near-death experience, they really spend a lot of time talking about relatives, people they saw on the other side. And there are a lot of people who speak with the dead, we're told, who contact relatives of someone who's suffering here, and the relatives tell them, oh, it's all going to be all right, or I'm in a really good place, something like that.
Right.
But I find it very interesting. He does say in the book that, you know, as a professional neurosurgeon, he was an atheist and he was not a believer. And yet, I believe he said he was a non-believer. As he's lying there in the hospital, declining at this rapid pace, and also unconscious or near to it, with his family members around him, he said, I'm gonna read you this. So they had just done his spinal puncture and it was like busting out with pus, right? And he said, after 2 straight hours of guttural animal wails and groaning, I became quiet. Then out of nowhere, I shouted 3 words. They were crystal clear and were heard by all the doctors and nurses present, as well as by Holly, my wife, who stood a few paces away, just on the other side of the curtain. And this is what he screamed, God help me!
Mm-hmm.
So he's in his darkest hour. He's a non-believer, but he sits up and he has the wherewithal to shout to the Almighty to save him. Mm-hmm. And then what happens? He gets a tour of the most unbelievable place and a consciousness conference with the great Om. And now he comes back to the regular world and he's on a mission. So, you know, he takes us into the realm of the brain. And a lot of these people in neuroscience believe that consciousness is created by the brain. And he said it's not. It's not. He said if you believe the brain is creating consciousness, the only thing that would be going on is chemical reactions, physics, chemistry, biology. That's what goes on in your brain. And free will and consciousness would be considered illusions of those chemical reactions. But my journey showed me the exact opposite is the case. He tells us, Emily, we are conscious in spite of our brain.
Yes.
And he says, these are my words, our brain is there to act as a reducing valve or filter. Because if we had all of consciousness at our fingertips all the time, we would be overwhelmed and we'd never get anything done down here. Because you wouldn't shop, you wouldn't cook, you wouldn't vacuum, you wouldn't go to your job, you wouldn't drive for Uber Eats or whatever you do. Because even I call it the polychrome sewage of your cell phone that keeps you interested and entertained. If you had consciousness at your disposal, you'd never look at any of that stuff. So he says, during the brain-based physical portion of our existence, our brain blocks out or veils that larger cosmic background, just as the sun's light blocks the stars from view. We can only see what our brain's filter allows. The brain, particularly its left side linguistic logical part, that which generates our sense of rationality and the feeling of being a sharply defined ego or self, is a barrier to our higher knowledge and experience.
Yeah, I mean, if people could be in touch with that or accessing that in its complete form all the time, there'd be no reason to, you'd just be laying with your eyes closed doing that, right? We wouldn't actually be going out and having, you know, sort of experiences or getting anything done or having, you know, the kind of person-to-person connection that we sort of have. And I like that term. What did you call the cell phones? The polychrome
sewage.
The polychrome sewage. So one of the things, and I think this was the maybe evil genius, but genius of people who have created the kinds of smartphones and cell phones we have and some of the types of computers we have right now, is they're actually tapping into a quality of light and color that is not as good as that which he is talking about, but which is more bright and more vivid than a lot of what we see in the actual 3D physical world around us. And it is our nature to be attracted to that. And that is part of how they have captured our attention into these devices, right? Like the closest colors I have seen to the colors that I told you about in the beginning that mean so much, that come in the psychedelic space and that sound certainly similar, if not exactly the same as some of what he describes in that this other world, or the, you know, higher realm or heaven, or however we're going to call it. The closest thing has been things that are delivered to me through some of these digital realms, and that is how they have captivated us with those colors, because they mimic and come close to, in some ways but not all, the spectrum from where we really originate from, right? So I like the way that way that you described it is exactly what it is. It's trapped us with that, the you know, sort of mimicking of color, right? Light and color, and you know, the sort of resolution, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, continue.
Well, I mean, I'm pretty much at the end, but I found it fascinating that our brain is a collapser. Our brain says, "Hey, let me just show you what you need to worry about. Don't, this other stuff would be really dangerous, you know?"
Yeah.
So you're going to only think about this, and we're going to learn how to live a linear life, and you're not
Yes.
going to know much about infinite love because you don't need it. Your reptilian brain says, yeah, 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 you don't need infinite love. I'm here. I'll save you.
Yeah. I mean, it filters out all of that stuff and just gives us enough sort of information, and it seems wrong to use this word, but like enough, just the tiniest little bit of inspiration to continue the next step forward in linear time, in your slave Uber Eats job or whatever it is, right? Like it lets just enough in, right, that it isn't the awful dense thing that you saw immediately on your way out, and that he experienced before he, you know, ascended to the higher realm with the spinning white light and the gold, right? So I don't know how, quite, if I do this right, this could be interesting, but I don't know quite how to explain there. I like the whole story. I love the idea that you had become fascinated with NDEs because they're interesting, and this story of him moving from being, you know, basically an agnostic or atheistic neurosurgeon into, you know, a person whose whole purpose here is to let people know the good news about this, you know, not in a religious way, but about, you know, that we are loved, and that our, you know, that what's real is this other sort of layer and level of things. And I love how you tied it in with the colors, and you know, that this all basically came from like some sort of weird bacterial infection of his fine brain and whatever, right? And you, that he was, it you, did you term it the Gateway Valley, or did he
No,
term it
the
the
gateway, he did. But I actually wrote to his, all these people, these famous people are flanked by, you know, uh, secretaries and staff and whatnot. And I said I had some thoughts about his experience that I wanted to convey to him. And they said, "Oh, yeah, please write, please write." And then I got sidetracked. So maybe this show will help me. But I did include a little bit of that in my newsletter at the end.
Mhm.
So here we have this earthly professional with the highest of credentials. He was a professor of neurosurgery as well. I believe he taught at Harvard or something like that. So, I mean, you can't get any more credentialed than that, right?
Right.
And he said, while beyond my body, I received knowledge about the nature of the universe that was vastly beyond my comprehension. Now that I'm back on Earth, it will take me years to understand, using my mortal material brain, what I understood so instantly in
Mhm.
the brain-free realms of the world beyond. He says it was a foretaste. Okay, so I wrote, something arranged for an earthly professional with the highest of credentials so that when he returned to tell the tale, others would listen and believe him. How does an adult brain survive after being ravaged by a rare E. coli bacteria that normally feeds only on the brains of newborns? And I believe newborns can survive this, but adults can't. Somewhere in the book it says something like that. But the venerated Dr. Eben Alexander would return in a new form. See, he was reborn with a new mind and a new understanding, born again, you might say, and to have his cerebral cortex kept in safe mode and get it all back in spite of the killer bacteria is only something the great Om can do or explain. So his brain was kept in safe mode. You know how your computer sometimes shuts down and then it comes back and it's in safe mode? Well, that's what the great Om did for him.
Yeah, I mean, that frequency, that vibration seems to hold something in like a kind of stasis, right? Like that not the kind of stasis that is devoid of life, but this other type of thing, right? That seems to be sort of like outside of time in this fascinating way. Let me ask you something. Are you familiar at all with the Monroe Institute and the Gateway experience?
Not that it doesn't like ring any bells.
So there's a gentleman named Robert Monroe who had an institute. I think it still is there, but I think he's passed. He doesn't have anything to do with it anymore, where he developed basically these techniques, right, for sort of through types of like meditation and visualization and sounds and things like that, people could sort of go through these levels of sort of leaving the body or leaving sort of linear time. And there were various levels that you could get to. And at a certain point, it included moving forward and backward in time, up and down in dimensions and whatnot. And this became called the gateway experience, right? And at a certain point, the military and the intelligence agencies became interested in what he was doing, and they sent people there to study that. And then they, did reports on it. And, I don't know that there's a way to get a clear answer on if they actually decided this was of use or value or not, because whether they did or not, they're going to tell you it's not, right?
Right. And they're doing it.
Right? So this experience is called it's called the Gateway document. They refer to it as the Gateway experience, right? And it's quite similar in many, many ways to that which you have described. And it's something that I have had some experience with in terms of some of the things that have happened to me in my life. I never went to the Monroe Institute or listened to the recordings or tried to do it, but I've had experiences that match what they describe as the Gateway experience. But I also, and are you familiar with the idea at all of like mystical toponymy? Have you ever looked at any of the Michael Hoffman work or anything like that?
Emily, you make me feel dumb.
No, you tell me things I don't know all the time, so it's good we can have the exchange. So
no, I mean, I've heard, I think I've now that you describe it, I've heard of the Gateway experience, but I wouldn't be able to talk about it the way you just did. So this Hoffman thing, no.
Okay, so mystical toponymy, at least the way that I perceive it, and maybe some other people would perceive it differently. So I'm not saying that like this is the definition of it, but it's kind of like the laying out of sort of like a mystical sort of initiatory or spiritual experience into like physical geography so that one can move through space in the same way that they would move through sort of a spiritual initiation or process, right? And certain locations or symbols mean certain things as far as the person's progression spiritually or mystically, okay? So when I first moved to Austin, the very place that I landed, this was the first time I moved to Austin in 1999. Like the place that I stayed in this hotel in an area of town called Gateway. Okay. And later I would end up living there a couple of years later. That wasn't where I lived my first go round in Austin, but where I lived my first go round in Austin was right above Monroe Street. Remember Robert Monroe and the Gateway Experience. Okay, so when I did end up living in the Gateway area of town was a couple of years later. And one morning I woke up with the worst headache you could imagine. Okay. And it wasn't going away. It was like I tried everything. I took Advil, I took Aleve, I think I took Vicodin. I took everything except for Tylenol, because Tylenol never works for me, right? And like I think I can't remember if I stayed all day with the headache or if I had gotten to the and when I can't remember. I think, but at some point that night, that afternoon or that evening, I couldn't take it anymore, and so I went to the hospital. And I'm the kind of person that avoids the hospital at any cost. In fact, this was the last time I've ever been to the hospital. So this was in 2001, maybe 2002, probably. Maybe, yeah, 2001 or 2002. And I couldn't take it. So I went to the hospital, and they told me that they believed I had, and the hospital, by the way, was in the Gateway neighborhood. Okay, I'm going to show you the Gateway neighborhood in just a second. So I went to the hospital, and they told me I had meningitis, and that they needed to find out if it was viral or bacterial. And the way that they would do that, because if it was viral, it would probably pass. If it was bacterial, they better start treating it with a bunch of stuff right away, otherwise I'll die, right? So they wanted to do a lumbar puncture, and I refused. I said no, because I'd already had a spinal cord injury, and anything around that area, like, I'm terrified of being paralyzed, right? Mm-hmm. So I said no, I'll take my chances. And then they gave me fluids and Tylenol in the fluid. So they put me on an IV, and within a couple of hours, I started to feel better. Now, Tylenol, which doesn't normally work for me, works differently than than Advil and the different things I'd taken. So Tylenol actually was the thing that started to help the pain reduce, which of course was the one thing I hadn't tried. But I stayed there for several hours on fluids, on the Tylenol. And then, at a certain point, they're like, well, okay, well, we still don't know, but if you're not going to let us do the puncture or whatever, then, you guess you can just go home, right? They pushed pretty hard. They really wanted me to take the puncture, and I said no. So in the middle of the night, I went home, and I started to feel better. And by the afternoon the next day, I felt a lot better and whatnot, right? So it must have just been viral. But this led to a very strange experience with the hospital bill. And so I ended up getting a hospital bill from them that was like thousands and thousands of dollars. And I didn't have health insurance at this point, right? And I remember going back to the hospital a couple of months later to like try and fight this chart, see if I could get it. I guess they had some program that you could get your stuff discharged if you made below a certain amount of money. And I made just over that amount of money, so they would not discharge the bill. So now I owed, like, it was a huge amount of money, like somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 for a few hours in the ER, right? And a bag of fluid and Tylenol. That was it. They didn't give me anything else. So I sat there and I did this whole paperwork with this lady about being able to go on a payment program where I would pay, a certain amount of money per month. My dad had gone there with me. We went when my dad was visiting. My dad went to the hospital with me, and we did this, right? I never received a bill from them ever. And like, it's never been on my credit that I didn't pay it or anything like that. It was really weird, right? So it happened right there in this gateway zone. And what Austin has been for me in a lot of ways is a mystical toponymy, like sort of laying out of the gateway experience. I have had so many strange experiences here, moving through sort of different layers of reality, forward and backward in time, the kind of ascension I talked about with music, figuring out locations that match people's description of sort of some of these spiritual and metaphysical places. And this whole gateway thing here in Austin, I'm going to just show you real quick. Okay, let me shrink this back down. Let me just return this to its original way that it looks. So, all right, so this is the Gateway neighborhood here in Austin. Okay, so this little area with this red dotted line around here is considered the Gateway neighborhood. And if you, and I know you do follow Alison McDowell's work, right? She has been to and talked about the JJ Pickle Research Campus, which look at its location right here, right next to the Gateway neighborhood, right? And then along Breaker Lane in Burnett over here, there's also SAIC, S-A-I-C, which has been involved in a lot of very strange sort of psychological, weird experimentation and operation kind of stuff. They have a location over here. Okay, so Gateway neighborhood. I lived here at one point. I went to the hospital here when this happened. And when I first arrived, this was the gateway through which I entered Austin. If you go down the road, or I'm going to shrink this down. If you go down the road along sort of this points here, all the way down one to this area right here where it says Zilker Metropolitan Park. This is the area of downtown Austin that I have sort of, I call it like the transporter of dimensions, or the sort of the portal, right? And I've had a lot of these strange experiences with music and sort of weird temporal kinds of effects. But the Austin City Music Hall is right down here, and behind what it was, they tore it down years ago, and now there's a building on it called the Proper that I have heard that Elon Musk owns the penthouse of. It overlooks a power plant and Shoal Creek, right? So it's like a limestone creek that leads into the Colorado River down here. And right behind what used to be the Austin City Music Hall is a bridge called the Butterfly Bridge. And below the Butterfly Bridge, down on the trail where you exercise down here, there's something called the Monarch Butterfly Garden, right? This area is like quite like some of the things that were described in Eben Alexander's experience, right? It's almost like trying to create like a physical location of that type of idea, right? And it's right downstream here from this Gateway area. If you just literally follow the point straight down, you arrive at this place. And then down here in this area was where I lived the first time I lived in Austin, where I had a lot of experiences that match up to what's called the Gateway experience. Lived right above Monroe Street, and had a lot of reinforcement of the idea of the term gateway based on some things I was involved with at that time, right? So it was kind of weird. It was like your newsletter, and I've talked about this. I did a whole, 2.5-hour presentation with Michael on our Glass Bead Game series about the Gateway experience, and I've talked endlessly about some of these locations. But it was like, almost like this newsletter you put together was like another arrangement of the same kind of ideas, right? And this has been happening a lot lately, where I'll see somebody tell a story or put together ideas that is just like another way to arrange the same ones that I've been playing with in something that I've been doing. And I've become super fascinated with it. And it's just kind of interesting. If you look over here, I wasn't looking for this, but one of the few things they're showing on the map is the Austin Hindu temple over here. And you were talking about Aum, right? I didn't type in Hindu temple, right? But Aum is this vibration. Om, Aum, the Buddhist or the Hindu version of the sound, is one of the only other big things that sort of shows up on this map. So mystical toponymy and the Gateway experience, and this story that you have shared, and the way that you described the colors and the way that the brain works and all of this is another iteration or another interpretation of some of these topics that have had me quite fascinated for the better part of the last 2 years at least. And And I love that you had covered them. These aren't always your usual kinds of topics, right? And it was I enjoyed seeing you play with these ideas and whatnot. And there is, while I haven't had a near-death experience, unless I'm in it, unless I died at that hospital in the Gateway neighborhood because of meningitis, or if I'm in a coma and I'm still wandering around in it or whatever. I haven't had that, but I have had a lot of interesting sort of psychedelic or other kinds of, I don't know what you'd call these experiences, sort of out of time or out of body kinds of experiences. And the way you described the colors in the beginning and the function of the brain at the end is that the same way that I've come away from feeling about all of this, that like the brain is actually sort of a limiter, and I don't know if it's our friend or not. Like, I don't know if it's a good thing that it keeps us pegged to linear time so we can get things done, right? But that consciousness is this field that exists outside of that. And somehow the brain is part of how we sort of access it, but not in this opening way, more in this sort of limiting or closing way. And when I have a psychedelic experience, there's this sense of knowing, right? You can just access and understand information instantaneously and completely. And then when I sort of return from it and am trying to explain it or put it to use, what I learned in that space, it is very, very difficult, right? To understand or to remember or to explain that which was so obvious and so clear in that state. So I wanted to explore that and with you, and to tell you about that and see what you thought.
Well, Emily, all I can do is really listen. And, our existence is a composite of many things. And as our existence affects us, it's kind of unique. We can try to express it to others, like Alexander has tried to express to others where he was, and he can't quite relay how it really felt. So I appreciate your knitting together of the experiences you've had. And I understand that there was a very interesting tapestry there for you that was extra dimensional, perhaps,
Right.
the way
Yeah.
Alexander's was. But again, this is, it's words kind of fail us when things are larger than life, or
Yeah.
more unique than chronology itself. Right.
Before we wrap the first hour here, did you want to? We're gonna move over to the patron segment. Tell people what you got going on your website, and yeah.
Well, I would like to. Yes, I stumbled. If you go to avatarproducts.com, that's my online store. I have put up some digital art prints that are pretty mind-blowing. I never thought I would be a fan of anything created digitally to the extent that I have become a fan of this stuff. I don't want to talk about it too much right now, but maybe we can do a show about it later, or talk about it in the second hour. But please, listeners, take a look at this stuff. It's featured on the front page of avatarproducts.com. And you can see on the art and prints page, which you will be directed to, what kind of emerged. And I would urge you, there's nothing like this material when you see it enlarged. The resolution, which was all done by a friend of mine, the increase of the file size we got out of these initial designs, which were kind of my input to a particular program. But anyway, let us know. Buy, as usual, if you want, our wonderful iodine, magnesium products. The usual, the what do they call it? Not a stipend, the staples.
Staples, yes.
Yeah, why am I getting like senior brain fog or something? I took a bunch of iodine this morning. But yeah, I'd really like to hear. I would love it if people would get some of these prints. You cannot give somebody a Picasso. They cost like $50 million. You can't give somebody a Monet But if you look at what's on this page, it's pretty damn close, and it doesn't cost $50 million.
Yeah, I was surprised when you told me you liked this, but when I looked at them, that thing that you are appreciating and loving about it is that sort of definition and quality of color and whatnot that we've been talking about here today. So
yeah, the
it doesn't
compositional
surprise me. Yeah.
comprehension that this program has, the color harmonies. I've shown these prints to professional artists who have said, wow, what an amazing takeoff point. You could paint from these things. You could do your own paintings, and you would be saved a lot of hassle in terms of what should I compose here, whether you're doing abstract or not. But I use some terms. There's a wonderful, I use the term freedom, universe, constellations. That's the Coro. It's incredible. To me, it's really incredible. And when you actually see these and they're large and you frame them and you put one in your house, it's a hell of a conversation piece. Look, you can buy a Van Gogh print, some, whatever, wheat field with crows, or the bedroom. I have a postcard somebody sent me of the bedroom. It's a painting he did. And it's nice, but I mean, you can't say much about it. You can't say anything except, well, this is a postcard of the bedroom, or this is a print of. When I was a little girl, we grew up with, my parents had Van Gogh's sunflowers on the wall. It was printed on cloth, but what can you say about that? This is just like a Van Gogh print on a piece of cloth, and it's framed. And it's because we can't even come close to having a Van Gogh in our house. So anyway, this is it was an experiment. I never thought it would turn out the way it did. And so I stuck them in my store so I could share them with people if they wanted to have something rather unusual and a conversation piece. So that's it, Emily. Avatarproducts.com. My feet are cold.
All right. So let's give Sofia a break so she can go outside and warm up. And we will discuss her AI art journeys on another episode sometime. We'll be right back.
You said AI. You said AI. It's a bad word.
Not always in its rightful place. It could be very helpful, but in this, whatever the sort of way that they're trying to attract us to it is not that. Okay, so we'll move over to patreon.com/offplanetmedia, emilymoyer.locals.com, or rockfin.com/Emily Moyer. And when we return, we're going to talk about sharks. We'll see you on the other side.